All right, about one more minute and we'll get going here. All right, well, good evening, everybody. It is 6 o'clock, so I will call to order the special meeting of Thursday, March 2nd, 2023. Please join me for a flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Assembly of the City and Borough of Sitka would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional first people of Sitka. With gratitude, we proceed on Tlingit Ani. Sarah, roll call, please.
Mayor Assenbeis,
Present.
Mr. Mosier,
Here.
Ms. Duncan, here, Mr. Yestad,
Here.
Mr. Christensen,
Here.
Mr. Pike,
Here.
and Ms. Carlson.
Here.
That'll bring us to persons to be heard. This is public participation for any item off of tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes. Is there anyone to address the assembly this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on to new business. Tonight, we are gathered to go over the general fund as a whole. I don't really have much on this. John, it's your turn.
Thanks, Mayor. Melissa will has a presentation queued up, but as you said, we're back here to discuss the final draft of the general fund budget, which was sent to you all on the, I forgot, the 22nd, I think you received it. You had your time to review it. We've incorporated all the feedback we've heard. And then, yeah, Melissa has a final presentation to go over all the numbers, and we'll be looking for any potential changes you may have that you'd like to recommend for the budget. Thanks.
And the goal of the presentation tonight is to kind of put all of the numbers in the many page budget you have in context, so you can see kind of year to year where we are, you know, how that impacts our operations as a whole. That doesn't mean you can't ask any questions. So feel free, if you have any questions on the detail as we go through, definitely chime in. And at this point, now that we have issued the formal draft budget, any change needs to be made by motion. So as we start looking at the budget, we've discussed some of these concerns in other contexts already, but we certainly, you know, we still have concerns around the economy. You know, right now they're throwing around more terms like soft landing. We hope that's the case, but we still haven't quite landed yet. So we don't know where that's going to be. We don't know what the impact of the economy is going to be on tourism or other aspects of our economy. We have the impact of the increase to cruise passengers. That might be good, that might be bad. So we're still dealing with that, and we saw a significant increase last year. We're seeing another significant increase this year. We still have ongoing challenges with higher inflation, and we also have a lot of opportunity out there around federal funding, but we also are seeing challenges. You know, we want to take advantage of as much federal funding as we possibly can, but that takes resources to actually get that funding, and then, you know, if it's for capital, to build whatever it is being funded. And then as the rest of the country is dealing with challenges getting staff. So we certainly, you know, as I said, the federal funding is an opportunity as well as a challenge. We also have our strategic plan in place, which is, you know, a very important guiding document for us. So that is a big opportunity. And then again, increased tourism is another one that's on the challenge side and the opportunity side. So our process this year, there's some evolution every year. This year we had a slightly bigger evolution where we presented resource proposals for anything significantly different or new to what our status quo services are. So that's what we reviewed at the last meeting, and those have all been incorporated into this budget. We're also continuing to really put a focus on risk analysis for determining which capital projects we are prioritizing. So our bottom line, the 50 pages that you have in front of you, the kind of high level, our revenue is at 42.6 million, as is our expense. So we have a very small surplus. We have a surplus of about $18,000 at this point. As we go through, this is a snapshot of our balancing act, which we have available. So as we go through, if there are any changes that result from this discussion, we'll be kind of updating it here. And so we can come back and see where that leaves us in terms of our bottom line and what any changes do. So this is a snapshot of our revenues. And this is comparing FY24 to our last completed fiscal year, which was FY22. So the lines are showing what percentage of total revenue for each year that funding source is, and then the bars show the total amount. So I think one thing that's very interesting that you see here, you see a pretty significant increase in sales tax. And but it's also about the same percentage of the budget as a whole. You can also see where our funding is changing. So in here, our federal revenue is going down. So we've had relief funding for the past couple of years, and that is going down. The other area of change, which is an increase, is from 22 to 24 is the transfer in from the Public Infrastructure Sinking Fund. So that was really a result of in FY22, at the end of FY20 and looking at FY21, we really didn't set aside funding for capital because we were in the middle of the pandemic. We didn't want to restrict that funding. So as we were coming out of it last year, we put a much more significant increase in, which that means because we put that money in last year, it comes back into the general fund this year. So that's why you see that big increase there. And again, as I go through, please jump in with any questions. So again, we have our reduction in federal relief, and we're making up for the capital spending, which it's definitely a move in the right direction. If you look at what wasn't spent over those few years, we're still probably not back to, if you average that out over those years, not back to our historical level of funding. So it's a great makeup, but it doesn't mean we're necessarily back to where we'd like to be. And then our increase in sales tax. So our primary source of revenue, our biggest source of revenue, is sales tax. And sales tax has been consistently challenging to budget. I certainly tend to budget on the conservative side. We're certainly seeing that this year where, my numbers, which, to be fair, were quite a while before the tourism season started. We weren't certain where things were going. They were very conservative for this last year, particularly the third quarter of 2022. We saw great returns. I think that the challenge here is you can see this line showing the percent growth. And when you have jumps like that, it makes it extremely hard to project. So you can see that for FY23, the second to last bar, it's not much lower than what we're projecting for FY '24. Part of that is that our marijuana tax is no longer going into the general fund. It used to be sales tax. That's switching to the marijuana tax, so that's not going to be included here. But it's still very modest growth from what we're anticipating this year.
I have a quick question on that. When I was looking through, I seem to recall in previous years, we would see the estimated and the actual kind of marching out. And I don't know if we can get that back at some point, because it's really nice to see that. I mean, it's just nice to see, like, I'd love to know, I don't know off the top of my head what the 22 estimated sales tax was. I'm sure you probably know off the top of your head, but
Oh, okay.
but it's just kind of, it always helps me when I'm talking to other people to say, we're super conservative on the revenue side and super pessimistic on the expenses side. And so that's, not everybody realizes, I don't think you get enough credit for that.
Sure. And we do have, for the last year, for '23, we do have the budget amount, what we're expecting through the end of the year. So that's a little bit of that, but yes, we can certainly, I can provide an analysis of. Yeah. And I definitely, I would much rather come back to this body with good news than bad news. So, but at the same time, I'm trying to provide a realistic picture because I don't want this body to have to make, difficult decisions that may not be necessary. So I still haven't been provided a crystal ball, which is what I really need. So again, this is, we've had really volatile sales tax, but we've also had some kind of systemic changes in here. So from 17 to 24, we've had a significant change to the structure of the sales tax code with the sales tax cap and things like the remote sellers commission coming online. So that's part of why you're seeing such a significant increase when you look at the course of time from 2017 to what's projected for 2024. So these are overall trends in revenue. So this excludes transfers. So you're really just looking at our different sources of revenue. So the green is our sales tax. So you can see it's just becoming, we're relying on sales tax more and more every year. Property tax is pretty darn flat. We are seeing increases in assessments, but we're also seeing increases in our senior exemptions. So they're really offsetting each other. You can see the kind of more robust, the next line down, the orange is the federal relief funding. And we're really anticipating it kind of going back to FY19 levels in FY24. And then we have our interfund billings. Those have remained very steady. And then, various services, state revenue is quite small here. It's getting down to the bars that are almost too small to see. And then going down to operating revenue and licenses and permits. As we look toward our expenditures, so some of the assumptions that are built in to the budget are a 5.4% in rate of inflation. That was the inflation that was published in January. We have an 11% increase budgeted for health insurance. The average for our provider in the state, they're anticipating to be close to 15%. Our brokers suggested that 11 was a reasonable amount. But that is one that could change that, when we get that nailed down, which will be probably in the next month and a half, that could result in a change to this budget. Hopefully for the better, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. And then we have assumed a 3% vacancy rate for most of the general fund, which as staffing has been a challenge, certainly in some departments. That is very, very low.
Do we have Valerie, maybe you know, a current vacancy rate? I'm assuming it's more at the 10, 12, 15% currently. 13, thank you.
And again, that's going to differ depending on which department it is. And then, you know, the other kind of unknown out there is what's happening at the state level that will most impact us in terms of local funding for education. So, you know, there are, if the state does increase the base student allocation, that means more funding going to the schools. It also might mean there might be more of an ask to the assembly to further fund the schools. So this is just a summary of all of the resource proposals that we went over. So this is by different goal and the total amount that was added to the budget. And not all of this was directly into the general fund. For example, the payroll system would go to the IT fund, and then that's allocated out around the organization as a whole. So a portion of that went in there, but a lot of these, the vast majority of these were general fund expenses. So the biggest being the housing study. For our expenditures, we have our kind of in order, we have education at about 8.5 million. Again, there's another, the marijuana tax that will go into the student activities fund will be budgeted out of the student activities fund. So you'll see that one when we do the internal service funds. We have police at 6 million. The transfers out for capital are at almost 6 million. And then we have finance and assessing at 3.5, our admin, assembly, attorney, clerk HR at 3.3, fire 2.9. We then go to the other transfers, which we have a significant portion of that is the transfer of the seasonal sales tax into our school bond debt service fund. And then there's some other transfers out in there as well. We have streets at about 2.1 million. The public works administration and engineering at 2 million. And then planning, building department, and we're moving parks and rec, that new program under planning and community development. So that one is at 1.5 million, library 1.4. Grounds and recreation at 1 million. So when you're looking at the budget this year, the first year we did it, community rec kind of lived under grounds and rec. So you will see some year-to-year differences there. You'll see a drop from 23 to 24 in the grounds and recreation, and then the reverse for community development, planning and community development. Then we have Harrigan Centennial Hall, where we are housing at this point a fair amount of our tourism budget. So we have some extra temps in there, some extra supplies in there. Then we have our charitable and nonprofit, which is at about 475,000, and then just a little bit for debt payments for the general fund, which that all has to do with storm drains. So here, and I apologize, somehow in the one that was sent out originally, I didn't have the FY24 budget in there, which is what we're talking about. So this chart adds it, and I'll make sure you all get a copy there. But you can see in here just the trends of our different expenses year to year. And it looks like I actually, these may have gotten a bit reversed, but Our top one here is going to be education, followed by police. And I will get this one updated here. I noticed it right before I left the office this evening, so like I got my numbers mixed up or got my order mixed up. But it gives you an idea. So you see the contraction in FY '20 and then fairly steady growth from that point. And it would have been, a more gradual upslope had we not had that contraction for 2020. Next, we're moving on to our capital appropriations. So this is in order of risk, and our next slide will kind of show you some of that risk analysis that was done by our Public Works team and Public Works and Asset Management team. And so in here we have the total estimated cost, what funding we've already secured, the unfunded amount, and what the FY '24 appropriation is, and then if anything is still needed. So in some cases, what we're doing is we're slowly putting money aside. And for example, for Catley-Ann, we might start work on design, something like that, as we're still setting more funding aside. So the ones that were that are not necessarily fully funded are Catley-Ann, Wachusett, Lakenhurst, there's a small amount, but that one's pretty close. And then the Lincoln Street, Jeff Davis to Lake Street portion. And then finally the Lincoln Street Harbor Way to Harbor Drive. So, some of those are getting pretty close and others have longer to go. In some cases, we're also seeking grant funding. So it might be that we've set some aside, that might be able to be used as match to leverage some outside funding. So. And I think on that other one, you saw that there was a start date and an end date. So the green chart shows when, and this is just for the projects that are funded this year. And keep in mind, we have a lot of other projects that are already funded. And we also have a lot of projects funded throughout the organization. Right now, we're only looking at the general fund. So we have the same team working on projects for solid waste, water, wastewater. So we're having to look at all of these, these here specifically are the general fund portion, but in some cases, we might not see the most priority project because it might not be general fund. But we do have this for the organization as a whole. And so what we're having to do is weigh available funding with the capacity of our team to get these projects done. And in some cases, it might be that having available funding, having grant funding might impact the prioritization. So even though you see a number or a project that has a lower number being included, it might be because we have funding available to do that. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out here is that we are requesting the funding of an emergency fund. Right now, it is very challenging when we have a significant lift station give out or a significant repair that needs to happen because the code gives us authority to move quickly to be able to get that repaired, but there has to be an appropriation that's used for it. And right now we don't have that. So we often, I think a great example is the HVAC system for Blatchley. It would have been so much better to be able to get some things going on that project instead of having to wait for a packet deadline to get it on the assembly agenda and then go through 2 readings. So what we'll be doing here is having a very specific process where anytime this fund is used, the assembly will be informed of that. And we're in the final stages of getting that drafted up right now. But that's what that is. And we had $100,000 already in place for, I think it was for storm drains that really wasn't needed as a capital project. And so we're proposing adding 400 to that so that we have that as a pool. So that in the event of an emergency, we can move more quickly to get that going.
And that 400 comes out of this year's capital
Yes.
fund then?
Yes. And the idea is that it would stay there around that level. So, you know, in most cases, what we do is get whatever emergency repair needed to be done. And then as soon as we can, come forward with a supplemental appropriation so that it's done as its own separate project. And then, so it shouldn't be diminished.
So it'll be refilled from the appropriate
Yes,
department or whatever.
Yes.
So how does that differ from our emergency fund that we already have? It's either 1 million or 2 million.
that is only, we have 2 million as part of our fund balance, but that requires an emergency declaration by the assembly. So this is not at that level. This is at the level of, you know, a lift station fails and we have sewage pumping into
Have we
the
considered
harbor.
then rewording some of the code to allow easier access to a chunk of that money as opposed to creating a new pot of money?
I don't think we've considered that.
Okay.
I just want to add to this, and Melissa's doing a great job trying to explain it. That emergency funding, if we were to take two examples, that pot of funding is for things more like FEMA type emergencies, like the landslide, we need to act right now with an emergency declaration. This capital emergency fund is Blatchley heat pumps being an example. We knew we were going to move forward on that one. And I think even some discussion at this table happened, like, how can we make this happen right now? This would be one of those instances where we would be able to make it happen right now instead of waiting for a 2 reading appropriation. But I think there might be some options available to maybe reword the code. I'm not sure.
Because it's
about that yet.
anticipated that within, I'll say a month, because that's 2 assembly meetings, that this fund would be refilled, correct? So as I'm seeing it, and I think it's worth investigation, if we have the 2 million already sitting there that anticipates being refilled within a month, why not utilize that with a code change as opposed to another $500,000 sitting there that's inaccessible?
And I think, you know, one of my, I get siloed into my little world. And part of most of these emergencies that we're referring to, they're usually going to be a capital. And, you know, for us, the way our charter is written, the flavor of appropriation is very important. And so that's why we were leaning toward having it as an existing capital appropriation that we could use with procedures around it.
Okay, and it may not be doable, but it seems like a reasonable fund that already exists that fortunately is seldom used and would be refilled quickly enough for us to still be able to respond to emergencies. So it's a thought.
Stephen, on that, I don't really care either way. I wouldn't mind adding a little bit, even if we do it, change it so it's from the $2 million pot. I wouldn't mind adding another, having another 500,000 available because of the price of everything right now. And I just think it'd be good to have a little extra money in there.
Okay, so again, I just wanted to point out that what is being appropriated this year, you know, right now, the estimated spend for those funds is from FY '24 through '28. So, you know, even though we've got these projects funded, in some cases fully, it doesn't mean they're going to happen right away. And then this is just our, you the alligator chart I show every year. I think one of our big challenges right now is we don't know what our new level of capital funding is going to be. We're still kind of finding what our new normal is. We've got more sales tax. We've also, got rampant inflation happening. We're able to, the tall bar for FY24. We're able this year to make a big investment, which the gray bars are the far axis. So it's not 30 million, it's 5. But it's great to be able to make a dent in our deferred capital this year. But we also know our deferred capital grew over the past couple of years. So this chart shows if we kind of go back to what our historic norm was, which was 2.5 million a year. So, at that rate, we continue growing. We know if we're able to put more to capital, we can start, leveling and eventually, getting that yellow line to slope down. And the other big thing here, which I have in parentheticals up there, is it doesn't include the schools. So we know that repairing and or replacing our schools at some point is going to be needed. We are working last year, the assembly funded and actually added extra funding to make sure we did a condition assessment on the schools. So I believe that they're getting ready to get to work on that. So hopefully this time next year, we'll have some more numbers. I'm a little nervous about putting them in here. It's going to make a pretty big alligator mouth, but it's going to be really important to see. And I think having that information will help the assembly make decisions that will help us be able to be prepared to fund that. So again, this is what our funding has looked like, the fluctuations in recent years. So we don't know what our new normal is. We're definitely working with, through asset management, through that effort to extend the life of our assets so that we're taking really good care of everything that we have. And then also to make sure that we're addressing the most critical assets, those that are going to have the most impact if they fail. And as I said, we're working on condition assessments across the organization. So our next steps, our meeting last week, I will take that and will incorporate the revenue projections into our enterprise fund budgets and get those finalized and get those out to you. And our next meeting will be March 23rd to discuss those.
Can I add one more thing? If you're
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to go back to that emergency capital fund if we can, because I think some good discussion could happen here. I can think of a couple instances of a need for that fund over the past few years. If you remember the issue with the lift station leaking near True Value, and we had to make some pretty emergency capital repairs there. Fortunately, we had a capital project that was about to line up, and we were able to kind of stretch things a little bit and pull that into that existing project. And like I said, the Blatchley heat pump thing, I just want to make sure everybody here knows that the intent of that capital or that line in our capital plan is just to get the capital repair moving. Assembly will always be notified. We will always come back with the appropriation at the time to fund the project appropriately, and then I'll say replenish the amount that is removed from that emergency fund so it can carry over. A capital appropriation can carry over year. So I hope that explains the intent a little bit better, but we can certainly look into the idea that the mayor brought up. I don't know if that fits cleanly. I can say we did explore that for the Blatchley heat pump issue. I remember talking to Mr. Christensen on the phone and we were trying to figure out how to make it move, and we couldn't do the emergency appropriation because we needed to have an emergency declaration, and that didn't really qualify as an emergency declaration as our code says. So that, hopefully that explains what we are intending to use this fund for.
I think, for me, it comes down to what the parameters are on this, so without more clarity as to, exactly what you're talking about and the, how this functions, then that's the question I have about it. I don't have a problem with setting aside money so things can get underway quicker, because I think sometimes that's just has to happen. But just what are you talking about? What fits as capital, yada, yada, yada. So.
Yeah,
I think-
and we are finalizing language around that. So I would expect that we would probably have something within the next month. So certainly before this becomes an active appropriation.
And I would agree with that, pretty tight parameters, because it's also based off of the person sitting in that seat and whether the assembly is on the same page with that person. It would be very important to write it not for who's in the seat now, but who may be in the seat in the future.
Agreed on all points. I just would like to make sure, though, that we include that, at least earmark that in the budget for now, because I've just been noticing, seems like there's so many more things failing. Chris, you were talking about some things that were failing. We had a conversation a couple weeks ago. The stuff outside of True Value, our infrastructure is, we're on a goal to try to fix them, but they're failing and starting to have major problems. And so I really think it's important to make sure we have as much as we can and set aside for that.
Yeah, I guess I kind of see it as, and every time like we have a big project, there's always a contingency fund, and this is like a citywide contingency fund in a way. That, is kind of for those old expletive moments.
They're happening a lot more often.
Yeah.
Well, and I think also what constitutes emergency, right? So, just because some group thinks it's an emergency, does that make it a citywide emergency that we would tap this fund for? So I guess those are sort of the parameters, and then who has the ability to do it? Do you loop the mayor through? The mayor has to approve it too. I mean, those kind of things are something to think about.
Well, I think that's all we have for our presentation. I mean, you've seen the general fund. We can pull up the Balancing Act website. I have that ready to go, that link active. If anybody wants to make any changes and see what happens to any surplus or potential deficit if we make any changes. But if there are no further changes to the general fund, that's what we will proceed with.
The morale boat made it in as well.
I think 2 of them.
2, perfect. Two morale jet skis.
I do have a question, Stephen.
Please.
I just have a question. You say one of the unknowns is where this, school funding is going to end up. And it depends on who you talk to and when at the legislature, where we're at on that one. So if the schools come back for more, where's that money where are you thinking that money might come from if that is something that somebody moves forward with?
If they come forward with a request for more funding, it will come from the general fund. And we'll be looking at a deficit budget or a cut to something else to balance it.
Just for the record, for me, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a hard no on any the base student allocation increases. The school will still benefit even if we don't contribute anymore. We've offered to give them everything they asked for, and it's a huge increase. So I hope the base student allocation increases, but it doesn't mean we have to add to that. So thank you.
I do have a couple things, but I think they best fit under our next item because it is more generalized. So I'll save it for that. But Other thoughts, questions, comments, concerns on our general fund as is? I guess the biggest part that gives me anxiety right now, and I'm sure anyone who sat in a seat, I'm sure Tor remembers when the general fund budget was 5 million. I'm not quite a dinosaur like that, but I remember, 29 million dollars, and now we're looking at a general fund of 42 million dollars. And there's, I understand costs of operations go up, but it's a big number for me, and it gives me a little bit of anxiety to think that the cost of operations have gone up that much. But when you look at where do we bring that back down, that's the harder thing, because I think it's easy for us to say that it's gone up. We can all see that, but how do we bring that number back down? Where does it go? That's it. That's the separate question there for me. So, Tor?
Well, I was gonna say it was 10 million. But I was very pleased to hear, I mean, we can say a big part of that jump is the capital that we transferred from last year. So, I mean, that's, if you take that out of it, it's much more of a progression that fits the curve. So, and I just wanted to say, said similar to last year, if there were members of the public here saying, why aren't you guys asking questions? It's because we've had all these meetings and you've laid it out very clearly. And we've had chance after chance to weigh in to set it up. And so by the time we get to now, because you guys have done your job so well, it's crickets. And that just says you guys are doing a nice job of making it very clear to us and everybody who's watching. And thank you.
And to add that, Tor, we've had access to all this personally, as well as the public for quite a while. So we've had a lot of time to review this. Not that we shouldn't be having these meetings, but the point is, to Tor's point.
I would like to add, balancing act that we had up. I've had that up for a year. I think I got maybe 20 or so interactions with it when I first kicked it off last year, and not much citizen interaction with it since then. And we have open finance available. That does get a lot of looks. And I think people are interested in seeing what's going on, but I'm not hearing many recommendations on what we should do differently. So I just want to make that plug again, that both of those tools are there. And if there's interest, if there's recommendations on what we can do better with this budget, please use that tool so we get the information and then we can bring it forward here.
Anything else on item A? General fund? Great. Thank you for that presentation, Melissa. We do appreciate it. That'll bring us on to item B. So this is a discussion direction decision of the fiscal year 24 budget as it relates to everything. So anything in the budget is fair game during this discussion. Does anybody have any items for B, our wrap up item? So I'll talk about my thoughts and concerns, and I'm not ready to do anything. I just want to see if there's even a temperature at the assembly level for this. This one was a little bit harder for me to come to, but I think it's worth a discussion at where we're at. So I understand that there's very little leeway right now in the budget, $17,000, but I think the assembly needs to take a hard look at our vacancy rate with staff, and what we can do to incentivize people to come work for the municipality. I understand that there are some people who have left recently because of pay, and that pay is always an issue on people's minds right now. Other organizations are raising pay at a fairly rapid rate as well. And that's not saying that we haven't kept pace, but I believe we're starting to get outpaced. And I think that is very evident in our vacancy rate right now. And now that's not the total solution. And I'm not saying throw money at the project and it'll suddenly get, or throw money at the problem and it'll suddenly get better. However, I do feel that we need to take a hard look at our staffing. Without staff, none of these projects that we have approved are going to go forward. None of our toilets flush, none of our lights turn on. At the very core of it, we are a people industry where we have to have personnel in order to make things go forward. And it's starting to get to a level especially in our police department, where we're not going to have people to do the basic jobs. Our electrical department, we're not going to have the people to do the basic jobs that we sometimes take for granted when we flip the light switch on. So I'd like the assembly to consider looking at some of, I say some of the new projects. I flipped through that 100 times, and everything that's there is worthy. Everything that's there has a reason. So it's very hard to pull stuff out of the new projects. Like, sure, I can pull out a vehicle monitoring system for 20 grand, but that doesn't give us a system-wide pay increase to where we need to bring staffing back. So I don't even know what a system-wide pay increase would look like. I don't even know where we're going to find the money for that. But it's something I really want the assembly to chew on over the next little bit. What is our priority here? Is it going to be our capital projects, or is it going to be our staffing? Because yes, I want the potholes fixed. Yes, I want to put some money into that. But if we don't have the guy to go out and fix the potholes, I don't care how much hot tar we have, it's not going to happen. So I felt like I'd be remiss if I didn't bring that up. And I don't have an answer. That's the hardest part. No, it'd be nice to come with an answer, a solution where I think we can do some of that from, but I don't. We'll go Tor, and then John, and then Chris.
Yeah, I would echo that it's something that's been on my mind as well. And if we're just kind of at the brainstorming level right now, so don't jump on. But, I know that, and a lot of companies, mine included, that at the end of the year, we look at how much money we made and we do bonuses, or sometimes we don't. And we could possibly look at something like that because of the very conservative estimates on revenues and things, that maybe we look at something like, if we have a surplus more than 17,000 at the end of the year, which I think is probably a pretty good likelihood, that we do bonuses and we make it, we set up some sort of a formula for that. I'm not sure that that's the end all problem, but it would at least give people something to look forward to. And then we wouldn't be pulling from current budgets. I mean, it would still cost us. It would be not as much rolling over into the infrastructure fund at the end of the day, but it might be a way of saying, when they close the books on a year, if we're well over budget on our revenues, we could maybe have some sort of a formula for bonuses. That's just an idea. I'm just kind of brainstorming, but I do think we do need to address this as well.
So the mayor, you and Mr. Christensen both bring up great points, and I share the same concern. I think hopefully to ease your concern a little bit, we still have budgeted, well, it still has to pass the second supplemental appropriation reading. We have budgeted the first part of a compensation study, a wage study. I've been in touch with the HR office and our HR attorney about some strategies on how we can do this, because things get very complicated when we have union represented and non-union represented, because the union contracts are set, the wages are in there. And if we do studies and potentially look at changes, then we're opening that contract again. And where does it go? That doesn't mean it's not possible. It's just, we have to be very measured about it. So even if there were an opportunity to, as the mayor put it, to throw money at it, it's not really that simple. I am aware of it, and I think the bonus thing is an excellent idea, because I will say that's something that we have a management right, whether it's a represented or a non-represented employee, to offer a bonus for good performance that does not interfere with anything, generally speaking, in the bargaining agreements. So that is an opportunity that we are exploring, and to find things like moving allowances and anything to help to get people here, any types of incentives. But again, we have to be very careful with what the contracts say, and make sure we're not, reopening a new negotiation, because sometimes it's not that simple. But if it's helpful and if you're okay with it, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, Valerie, she could come up and kind of talk about the compensation study that's going on and what we will hope to gain from that. Would you like to hear from Valerie?
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful. And I was aware of that. I fear it might be too little too late by the time we get it done. And if we don't start a conversation now to even see if there's the temperature, then. Welcome, Valerie. Thank you.
Just the timeline, though, it's going to be completed this fiscal year, correct? If it passed in the appropriations there.
I think it's going to cross over multiple fiscal years because this is going to include job description rewrites, maybe a reorganization, discussing with the bargaining units. Do we start with non-represented first and then possibly look at represented employees? We're going to move as fast as we can, but I think even moving fast, a full wage and compensation study can take upwards of 6 to 7 months. And I think that's moving fast, but sorry, I hope I didn't steal all your thunder.
No, so we are looking at a compensation study, and everything that you've talked about is a part of that study. So what that helps us understand is how do we look at wages? How do we use variable compensation? How do we use incentives like for housing? Housing is a huge problem for us right now in recruiting. So how do we put all of those things together so that we can offer packages that are attractive to everyone? So when I say variable compensation, it can mean bonuses. It may mean an extra day of annual leave. There are so many things that we can do with variable compensation to offset wages. So wages isn't always what we focus on. So there are many aspects to a compensation study. So the first piece of that is to have your job descriptions accurately reflect what people do, because we look at market. And so market is based on scarcity of skill sets. So for example, we have a public works civil engineer. They need a certification. They are rare commodities in the market. So you look at skill and you look at how scarce they are. And so that may be how you look at wages and variable compensation for that position. We can have some that you have a labor surplus, so you may not have to pay as much. So it's very detailed, but we can have, I would say, the non-represented. We should be able to get those completed first. The only reason I'm looking at the non-represented is because we just negotiated contracts. And so those wages have been adjusted. So I'm not saying that we don't want to look at them, but I think we need to move very quickly. And we need to look at, first of all, jobs that are mission critical to the city. And now that could be someone who's represented. It is very possible. But that first step is let's figure out what these jobs entail. Let's get them right. And I'd say we're about halfway there, John, because we've been working on this for a bit. So the job descriptions, we should be able to have wrapped up, I would say, in 60 days. And then once we get them wrapped up, I can request the compensation data. We need to identify a firm or a consultant to help us because it's a very heavy lift. If I were to try to do that on my own, which I've done it a couple of times for other companies, it could take me almost a year because it's so detailed. We don't want the consultant doing all of the work. They're just going to help with the heavy lifting. And so we can cut the time that it might normally take us in half. If we do that. So first step is the job descriptions. We're almost there. Next step is identifying what's mission critical. And then somewhere in there, we need to identify that firm. We need to get that compensation data. And then we can actually start looking at, okay, so how do we attract people? What is it? It's not always wages. Quite often, it could be remote work assignments. It could be partial remote. There are so many things out there that we can do that we refer to as variable comp to really hold the line on your wages. There are some jobs we are just going to have to pay what the market asks for because you're not going to get anybody otherwise. And then, of course, housing is also a huge issue for us. Now, we have had a resource that we haven't had before, and BHA have been absolutely wonderful. So they contacted me and offered assistance with essential workers, housing for essential workers. And so we were able to recruit an experienced lineman, and he'll be starting in about 3 weeks. And it's only because we had that housing resource available. So I'm incredibly grateful to that staff, and they are so helpful and so accommodating. So that's a small piece of the puzzle. It's not going to solve all of the housing issues because there are positions where we are going to relocate. The resource just doesn't exist in Sitka. We find, or there are folks in the larger cities, but they're really not willing to move to Sitka. They're in Anchorage because that's where they want to be. It's a little bit bigger. It's still Alaska, but it's a little bit bigger. So it's a pretty complicated issue when you start talking about how do we recruit people into rural areas. Not just Alaska. I've worked in small towns all over the United States. The struggle is still the same. Smaller towns, it is very difficult. So is there anything else? Did I leave anything else? Did I tell you too much? I'm not quite sure what you wanted to know and what you didn't.
No, that was great. It sounds like you definitely have a firm grasp on that, which is awesome. Any questions for Valerie while she's up here? Appreciate your explanation of that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was good to hear all the comments. I appreciate it. Everyone, they all have validity. I just wanted to offer my appreciation for Valerie's comments. I do think kind of mumbling here, but the word throwing money at a problem doesn't always fix it, although sometimes wages do need to increase. I like the fact that you're thinking, we're going to be thinking creatively. The employees did just, at least the union employees just did get a very substantial raise. And those are good for 3 years. And if we're going to do things like wage, some sort of financial increase, I would prefer more bonus type where you have more control over it, because once you increase a person's standard wage, it's very hard to take it back, almost impossible. So I'm okay with the conversation and with going forward. I just don't want to, get the idea or the thought out there that we're just going to start throwing money out there or increase it substantially anytime soon. It is a very complicated, and it needs to be done very thoughtfully and carefully. Thank you.
As a body, we showed at the last meeting that we're supportive of replenishing so that housing survey, so that the compensation study can be performed here. And from that information will kind of outline what sort of financial resources are needed. Also looking at the last couple of months, so as we've been coming here, I looked back to strategy 5, which is where this fits within the strategic plan, right? And right now you asked for a couple of things that were very tangible. So a new tracking system, those sorts of things. Having not brought that forward, I see that your timeline might be a little bit different, and just hearing from the HR director and you as far as where we're at, I'm supportive of uplifting our employees. I think I'll do it on your timeline based off of what you're going to look into, because even like bonuses are complicated. So here we identified a 13% vacancy rate, but we said, what about year-end bonuses? Well, what about sign-on bonuses? Are those more appropriate to fill that gap? And I've worked in HR, but I'm not going to pretend like I have expertise in that area. I see that we have leadership that does, though. So I would expect that as you kind of develop and get more information that tells you how to act and address these things, that you'll come to us and let us know, because that is a concern of ours. That is a strategic goal that we unanimously supported. So thank you for doing the work on it. It is something that we should be concerned with, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking into options for attracting and retention of employees. Sorry, guys, I'm burned out tonight, but if you could all just indulge me for a second here and take a step back to well, I guess I can bring it up on this item, but basically going back to our last, I started remembering there's a few things in the general fund proposed budget that had caught my eye, and finally remembering them. And I guess I'd just like to ask questions about them, if that's okay. One is in the training and travel line item. I mean, I'm just comparing to 2020, but kind of going through most of them. It was a rather large jump for 2024. I mean, having been sent to AML and everything, I understand it's very expensive to have us go and train and learn. Is there a particular reason that one was pretty substantial jump.
I would guess, without knowing exactly which one you're looking at,
Page 8.
page 8.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we're seeing is we're seeing, we had the almost no training for a couple years, certainly no travel. And now we're kind of getting back to the norm as well. I know in finance, I actually requested more to actually do accounting training for my staff. So I think that's probably what
Yeah,
you're
and I think we
seeing.
have gotten some new employees in new positions, so I'm sure there's a lot more training involved there. But yeah, so that was one of the ones, and I totally understand. It was just kind of, it caught my eye when I was skimming.
Yeah.
And then let's see, was it the next page?
Can I add something to that while you're
Yeah,
looking
yeah,
up the
no
next
problem.
one? Also, if you look at the 20 and 21, those are actual amounts and some significant things that happened in those years. And in 2020, when I first came on board, about half of the department head positions were vacant. So there was a lot of travel that was not happening then. And then in 2021, obviously none of us were doing any travel for COVID. So I would almost eliminate those in the analysis
that I
and
was-
look more at 22, 23. And
Yeah,
24.
I was assuming, obviously a pandemic probably had a ton to do with that, but yeah, it was just a number that caught my eye, and here we are kind of talking about maybe bonuses or increased pay, so I thought I'd bring it up. And then the next line item that kind of caught my eye here was transportation and vehicles, page 9. That one was actually, that was another pretty
And
good jump.
that one, I actually, I sat at our department head meeting last week and told everyone, don't be too surprised. There's some big numbers with the central garage. The biggest part of that is so for each vehicle, all of the different departments and different funds pay into central garage so that when it's time to replace the vehicle, that's there. Well, we know what has been happening with prices, and part of what we're seeing is I had to go through and boost all of those replacement values because the numbers we originally had, we can't replace our vehicles for. And so the next couple of years, we're going to see higher numbers here because we're having to put more aside to be able to replace the vehicles when they need to be replaced.
Okay, yeah, no, that totally
So,
makes
yes.
sense. I mean, I've seen the stickers on trucks the last couple of years, and yeah, the jump is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I want to add to that answer as well. We've brought up vehicle tracking. I've heard loud and clear from a few employees that are concerned about vehicle tracking as if we are watching what they're doing. Vehicle tracking is fleet management, and it's part of asset management, and it's best use of the asset. It's not to watch where a person is going and what they're doing. It's to fix this jump right here, because if we can bound vehicles to certain areas or track their actual usage and try to spread the load out as much as possible on different vehicles, we can manage the fleet better and get that cost down.
And I do want to comment, I mean, going through the budget here, I just did a budget for another organization. Actually, I'm really impressed by a lot of it, that it hasn't gone up as much as in certain categories as I would have thought, even with all of our inflation and just everything that's going on. So in general, just great job. Thank you.
Anything else from the assembly tonight on anything budget related? All right. So that'll bring us to persons to be heard this evening. This is public participation for any item on or off tonight's agenda not to exceed 3 minutes. Is there anyone to address the assembly this evening? The public in the room also got all their answers from your presentation, Melissa. Thank you. Oh, please join us.
Do I need to state my name? Okay. Dave Nichols speaking. I found the finance presentation to be really interesting. Thank you, Melissa. And I had no idea that the sales tax revenues were going up and away from $10 million to 15, to projected to be $20 million per year, and maybe with more cruise ship passengers, maybe even more than that. So my question is, would it be legal and or beneficial to the citizens of Sitka to establish a permanent fund using some of the extra millions of dollars in sales tax revenue? And I'm not a finance person, so I had no idea whether it's even legal to do that. So in 2 minutes on the internet, the city of Rio Rancho, New Mexico, had approximately a $10 million windfall from COVID money, and they did exactly that, putting, investing, and the interest income from the $10 million, they spend half of it and return half of it to the principal. So it can be done in other parts of the country. I don't know if it's legal in Alaska or it'd be desirable to consider that in Sitka. But I'm just thinking out loud here, with rising interest rates, there could be some attractive investment returns on fixed income without taking on too much risk. The stock market, that could be a plus. And I'm just thinking, looking back 10 or 20 years from now, will we be looking back and saying, geez, when the cruise ships were coming in and we were getting 15, 20, $25 million a year in sales tax, we wish we had locked that up, because what if the cruise ships stop coming or there's less revenue? So just an idea. And, Haley, Melissa, I'm sorry, talked about the instability in planning when your sales tax growth is up 1 year, down 1 year, up 1 year. Would it be possible to have some amount that's like indexed for inflation? So anything above $15 million would go into a permanent fund, and that would still allow for some stability in planning. I don't know. I'm not a finance person, but just putting the idea on the table of a permanent fund for the city of Sitka. Thank you very much.
Anyone else for persons to be heard this evening? Any item on or off tonight's agenda? Seeing none, that would bring us to adjournment. No one else wanted to. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Thank you, Assembly. We are adjourned. Oh, he left already.